It's Sunday, 6 p.m., September 15th. Can't imagine we made it past Labor Day. Anyway, welcome to Steve's Place. We have a special guest tonight, uh, Michael Leas, and he's an expert on everything Tesla, Tesla coils, and water vessel, and the universe in general. I'm looking forward to seeing his presentation tonight. It'll be uh, basically a hands-on demonstration. But before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone we have a conference coming up August 6th to 10th. We have a call for papers. I put the information for the call for papers. Just contact me in the comments there. Um, we're looking for uh, hardware at priority. We want hardware over hot air. And so I encourage, if you have something to show, to send in your abstract. Okay. And before I forget, uh, if you could hit that thumbs up, down in the YouTube thing, those thumbs up are very important. It's how they determine what they're going to promote in the future and that. So please, hit that thumbs up if you would, and possibly even join our YouTube channel. In which we have about 3 different conferences up there. I'm getting ready to work on the 4th one. It's $9.99 a month to be a member, but the subscriptions are free. We have a couple hundred free videos up there you can watch. And we're also looking for people to join. It's $9.99 a month. It really helps us out and everything. And if for those who might not be aware, we have our Tesla Tech conference, was live streamed this year, and those live streams are available if you can click on that little QR thing. That will take you right to the order page, and the order page will look like this. You can actually donate stuff, to the cause right there. That all goes directly to us. But we also have T-shirts for sale up there. If you'd like to get a T-shirt, and these are great designs and everything, you can go up there and just click on that and check it out and see what we have to offer. If you get the live stream or video on demand, it's $99 and it's a lifetime. You won't ever have to pay anything after that forever. Unlike these other conferences, which have them available for a time, we're making it permanent. For people who get the VOD. Okay, and let's see. Check my notes up. And today is September 15th. It's the last day of the DVD sale. I encourage you to give us a call. Call me in the morning. That'd be okay too. I'll honor it. And so anyway, I think that's about it. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce Michael Leas. And Michael, are you there?
I'm here.
Okay.
You can hear me set up or not, but that's cool. I'm a little focused. Let's see if I can move the camera around just so here. Kind of see where things are at. See if it's close enough. If you can see where I'm at. Oh, it looks like the camera's backwards.
Well, I can see you. Anyway,
okay, so if I move to this side, let me see where I'm at so we can get a little more self-centered here. Looks like it's in out, but it's cool. Okay, if I hug the table, now we know where we needed a center point to kind of get things going to. So, hey, everybody who's on the streaming, we're getting things rolling. This is like one of the first times we've done this. But welcome to the garage. I really appreciate Steve inviting me to kind of show what's going on inside the Garage Explorer's mind, so to say. Tonight, because we were talking earlier today on some of the concepts that I'm just trying to walk into on cyclic energy. And it's one of the things I have a passion about of trying to find out not only about the exterior world, but what's going on inside myself. So, I'm just going to kind of unveil this project that I've been into, which I call the Magnevex Research Project. And piece by piece, I'm going to put it together somewhat of the beginning, and then kind of unveil some of the other parts that are here. In the background, you can see some of the Tesla coils that I've assembled. And in that, you'll be able to see some of the demonstration where I have some wireless setups going on where you can run a wireless motor. And just recently, I was been able to charge some multi-capacitors with Tesla coils, which is really cool. So I think what I'll do first, and I'm going to get behind the camera, and I'm going to pick up the camera, and I'm going to kind of go close up so that you can kind of see what's sitting around here. And then I'll show you the picture of the Magnevex. And when I get back to that point, I will end up kind of pulling that out individually so that it can be seen a little differently. I can kind of explain what's happening. But this is the Magnevex, what I call the Magnevex, a magnetic electric vortex. And through time, what I've done is been researching into magnetism and trying to adapt it into an energy device, meaning that I'm trying to compose, concepts that I've studied from other people, whether Walter Russell, this Ernest Norman, Nikola Tesla, even John Searle, John Keeley with Dale Pond's type of sympathetic vibratory physics, because all of this stuff ties together. So this is a smaller machine that I've built. It's been, probably 20 years in the making. And tonight, not going to show anything of the larger machine, but it's somewhat of the same concepts. Maybe a part two we're talking about with Steve to kind of show the larger machine running. But this is kind of an energy diagram that I came up with. And, if all these principles are true in the universe, so to speak, and what these philosophers and or scientists over time have stated, then those concepts should be able to be applied to certain disciplines throughout our course of understanding. And meaning that if a principle of energy is true, then we should be able to take that principle, a function on the process of energy, and adapt it into other forms of science, whether into healing of the human anatomy or other electronic things in computers. We should be able to take that formula, so to say, and adapt it across the platforms. So this up front is just an energy concept that I've kind of worked with. I think right now there's some misconceptions in how things go together in the universe. I am not an expert, and even though Steve said I am on the Tesla coils, I'm just a researcher. So I'm just trying to discover things the best I can and make heads or tails from all this stuff that's out there. So a lot of things that people have started to get into is the toroid. I believe they're completely false in the idea that everything just goes from, like they described in the magnetic fields, where it goes from the north to the south. I believe, since all the masters, even, you look at Jesus or Buddha, that it comes from within. And so this is kind of a conceptualization of cyclic energy, where if this is an inner vortex, that the inner vortex creates the outer field. And so tonight I want to kind of go into some of the theoretical ideas of my own ideas, is that the field is going to be the process of how we discover so-called free energy. I'm not a total believer in free energy. I am one who wants to find out the cyclic energy process, or the principles of what makes it function the way it does. So this is just a kind of a visualization, but let me move this aside, because I'm going to go through and I'm going to put on the platform here tonight different things so you can see the unveiling, because I think it's very important to kind of see how this came about with the process of nature. So let me move this off, and then we'll start at the beginning. So years ago, a few people had, gotten into researching different concepts. And the first thing that fascinated me was magnets, the relationship of positive and negative. So if you can see, this is a magnet that was broken, because it's gonna have meaning as I walk through this. Right now, this magnet here was broken in half. I let it snap together and it snapped it, but I end up in the course of time finding that I can get it to balance on its edge. And so let's go like this right here. So right now, as everybody knows, you can take another magnet in your hand and you can move that to get those magnets because of the magnetic field. Okay? Field is the part of the equation that I think a lot of us as researchers need to look into, because the field is really what we see in the third dimensional realm. You can see if I move this over here, I can move this here, I can move this over on this side, I can move it above. Now if you can see clear enough in the where I could stand that up and I'll put it back just for one other thing, but you can see that through the force of this magnetic field, it affects this field on these other magnets. So why am I saying that? Because anything in the operation of life needs to have a movement of that energy. And that energy can only move through another medium. I believe that there's something greater than just the magnetic field or the electromagnetic field, because they are part of a construct of a larger fabric that interpenetrates all things, okay? And if you want to go through and look back in time into Walsall Russell work or Ernest Norman's, some of his ideas were basically that everything comes from the mind, okay? The cosmic mind. So let me move this again, because I want to bring up a couple things right here, because this is where a lot of this idea started from. When you look out into the world, and I don't know if Steve, if it's possible to bring up that first slide. And it has the one that says the Magnevex on there or not. I don't know if you can see it. But just to kind of show, these are all from different kingdoms. You know, a tree from another, pine tree, and different species of trees and stuff that are out there. But if you look at it, they all have the same principle of idea of that spiral, that golden spiral, okay? And on that picture that I have there, you can see that it goes from basically the atom, which I was trying to show in that first, display I made, and it goes along with that picture in the back there of that same concept, that it comes from the atom. And then it expands, and you can see from the microcosm to the macrocosm that same patterning of expression appears. So if you're just observing in the fields of nature, you're seeing that there is some inherent intelligence that has those ideas come into that fabric of that energy. Okay, Steve, that's cool on that first slide. If you want to maybe drop it to the second one. But everything that's in that you look around, I don't care what it is, even the stuff that's sitting around in your house, it first had to be thought of. It first had to come from the mind. And in that understanding of the IQ, so to say, or infinite intelligence, that we all have this inherent field of that spark of divine source, that when you ignite that you can create a creative idea. How do I want to explain this? That even this shell, this nautilus shell, the fish or whatever was inside of here that had formed this, they had to have that same idea, same as this shell and this shell. They all had to have some inherent intelligence to do the similar thing. If you go back and you look at the sunflower and the broccoli and all these different things around that are in the many kingdoms that are out there, you'll find they all have the same patterning. So that was where my first question began, is that if we're ever to find an understanding of energy, because energy is the source of intelligence that is creating this design. So the other thing I wanted to point out, if you look how this vortex is, it's got the larger field dropping down to the smaller field as a vortex. And inside this is contained the seed, okay? The seed is the small point. And that small point in the course of time will drop into the ground by itself, and it will regenerate and become a tree. Regeneration, cyclic regeneration, cyclic energy, cyclic motion. So the reason why I want to bring these out is that part of that information kind of struck me when I was looking at, out in the fields, hiking, doing stuff, grew up through going through scouting and just being an observer of nature. It influenced me to know that there's an inherent intelligence in all things. And by seeing that, I thought to myself when I was starting to get into, my late teenage 20s, 30s, and saying, how does this stuff work and why? And so in that quest, there was a deep fabric of information that I needed to know. And the cleanest pathway of finding that idea was in the search of electricity and magnetism. And I believe those two forces of the universe are basically the constructs of how all of these material things exist. So just take a breath here and kind of to say that the items that we see on the outer, the physical body, the elements, whether you're washer and dryer or a book or whatever it is, the outer field is what we see in the third dimension. But there's a higher intelligence, there's a higher IQ, there's a higher supporting structure that comes not necessarily from the outside field to support that, but it comes from within. So when the great masters, Jesus, Buddha, other of the, even recently I was reading a book with Paramahansa Yogananda, and some of these gurus could sit down and materialize a particle or whatever it might be, and they had a different contact to that inner realm. So I felt if we're truly going to find what people are searching for, perpetual motion or free energy, you have to understand the laws of energy. And in that process of reasoning, it led me to search out ideas. And so let me move this aside, because I think it's a complete visual. This is actually a fossil, and it has that same design of that Fibonacci or the golden means or whatever it is, that golden spiral. So Steve, if you want to roll to that next slide, let me move this, and then I'll bring up a couple next things here. So what I wanted to know, because it's still a burning question for me, is how does this stuff pattern itself and why? So, because if we want to create something, okay, this is the other painting that's in the background here. I call it parallel worlds, parallel universes. And I do believe that the forces of creation are positive, negative, male, female, the yin yang. They are the same, but they are distant opposites of the mirror reflection of that identity. The only thing that separates them is the moment of that fulcrum where they exchange the polarities of those energy fields, okay? The opposite fields are always seeking some form of unification in the balance of all these harmonics. You have to visualize in your mind, if you're really, truly trying to understand these processes and the forces that are around us, is that we live in this harmonic relationship of variables of frequencies that are so beyond our understanding. We'll never know the completion of it all, but we will know points in time. And that's somewhat of what that picture describes, is that if you look at the middle of it, there's an atom that I placed in the middle. And everything comes from within. So if that be true, because these are things I'm trying to discover and or try to relate in my research, is that if that be true, what these masters have said, that it comes from within, then if we shape that outer field somewhat in a simile relationship of what nature has done in the Fibonacci or these different designs, that inherent intelligence, if it's correctly related, should be somewhat of the sustaining factor of why that mechanism, whatever it might be that one is working towards, would then function. Because you've given it the animated condition that you've instilled within that property, okay? So what has that ability to be released? Well, a magnet. A magnet is a stored potential, I believe. And you have the field, it's an expression that can be used once it's in motion. So electricity, the opposite side, I believe, is the other side of that spectrum. I may not have all the conceptualization or the way the physics write it, but these are the ways that I see it to be able to build out my own constructs of what I'm working on in this device. So to go back and to start is that if energy in and of itself is one, okay, that's why I have the cycle. I have a positive and a negative. So in these laws that we've all seen in magnetic fields, that they either want to attract or they want to repel or they want to push apart or they want to gather together. So if these two polarities, call them male, female, yin and yang, and they are floating in this sea of energy and they are a certain frequency in and of themselves, they in their own lifespan or cycle or whatever you want to call it, want to somewhat attract to each other because they are a unit of design. So like a male and female, they want male and female, they want to attract. So to describe this, if this is positive and this is negative, and they want to attract to each other, they are a unit. They try to attract, and all they can do is at one point in so-called time, they can converge. And that is where the fulcrum of time, so to say, happens. I know these are kind of wild outside ideas, but just follow me on this because there's a point to be made. If at that point they cannot come together any other way than at a convergence at a point of focus in one instant of time. So they can't combine and to become a one cycle again, they will have to split and become two because the positive will attract, but because they are also repelling each other, they're going to recreate another repulsive force to create this pattern that has been seen through the histories of things as when they try to attract, they can't combine again, so they have to repel each other, and it creates this so-called four-leaf clover. Or if you really want to look at it, it's really kind of a vortex that becomes forming. So from one cycle creates the mystical ideas of the infinity symbol, and then they try to recombine again, and they can't, and they split and divide one more time out of one cycle. So in that cycle, what it does, you create a movement in the harmonics of energy, in the sea of energy, because you have to visualize that everything that we are, even this physical body, that it's just a combination of elements that have come together according to the vibrational frequencies of the harmonics through an evolutionary time where it's gained a certain spectrum of intelligence that have brought it down to where we live in the so-called third dimensional realm today. Okay, so if you go back in so-called time, you'll find that there are mystical things that we are not totally aware of how they built, whether the pyramids or the ideas of Atlantis or space travel and all that. It's because we become blocked off in the outer material realm. Okay, and I'm not trying to be some, spiritualist or some religionist, but I'm trying to be a naturalist of visualizing what's really going on with energy, because energy is life's interdimensional expression. I believe there's multitude of dimensions far and beyond our understanding. That's, if you look at the very word infinity, it is incomprehensible. If anyone ever could understand infinity, it would never be infinity. So there will always be a point that you're only somewhere gravitating through those motions of expansion, or if how you use that energy, you can also collapse that field where you have reached the point of diminishing returns, where you no longer have that oscillation to regenerate. So if that be what I'm searching for is a regenerative process of electricity and magnetism coming together, combining, replicating through its own harmonic interplay, then really what I'm looking for is to see how a mechanical system can function as what a human system does. We have different components of our body. We got the circulatory systems, we got our breath, we got our heartbeat, we got the nervous system, and other elements of our senses, which are really just like a voltmeter to touch upon the fields of what we see as the third dimension. Our eyes take in, light factors or whatever it is. But we're all traveling through this moment together. Each moment successively progresses into the future. So the problem that I've seen in a lot of these so-called free energy devices, whatever it is, they forget about that optic of time. Time we're engaged in many forms and factors that are out there in the motion of things. Life is always on. Okay, there's never a time when it's off. Even when you die, if you truly understand the process of what's there, it's a regeneration of that field that you are, that intelligence, that psychic field that moves on to another spectrum of what you have worked with. Just like when I showed you in the beginning of the pine cones and the seashells and stuff like that. It's a factor of where you are inclusive within this energy field. So Steve, if you want to jump to the next slide so we can roll through that, is that when I first began this, it was fascinating for me to see, and read and to research whether Leonardo da Vinci, and somebody years ago I worked in the commercial printing trade, and one of the guys there was into crystal radios and into building Tesla coils. That lit the fire for me when I first seen a Tesla coil throw off the lightning sparks. It was fascinating to see that was something that was alive and animated. Electricity. It is the life force. And for those that think that it's a chemical process, you have to look at the chemistry and you have to look at the conceptualization that for that chemical to function, there either has to be a positive or a negative electric field that is exchanging the differences or the variables, either the greater than or less than across a fulcrum to co-create what it is in all the constructs of the elements. So that's why I do believe what Walter Russell was visualizing in his artistic design of the conceptualization of the atomic fields or the periodic fields, and the way that he fashioned those is very fascinating, because if nature is of a design in and of herself, or she is a spiral, then all of these other elements have to fit into that puzzle, because nothing can exist outside of that natural orientation of that field. So let's go to the picture that's on the slide there. You see a picture of Leonardo da Vinci who visualized flight. That came from his mind. So in the course of time, here we are years later, we have flight. So you see a picture of Nikola Tesla in the bottom, where I placed a UFO above there, because I do believe Tesla was into the idea of being able to fly and have electricity as the motive power. He believed that there was an etheric field or some other form of a supporting structure. It's just like the water's got to carry the boat. So if you got a magnetic field, you got an electric field, there needs to be an understanding, even though these may do what they do, air and all the different components, nitrogen, all the gases, but there's an electric condition of spirit, whatever you want to call it, an intelligence or a higher conceptualization. The ancient called it spiritos or the Christos. And if you look on some of the scripts of some of the ancient ideas in the hieroglyphics, that they had a different conceptualization of electricity. They knew it was the force, and they drew it as the serpent because it's the sine wave. So in my research of things, I have found that Nikola Tesla, almost every one of these, everybody believed that you needed to understand the process of the movement of the waveform. And in that movement of the waveform, you see that the wave carries that potential, and it transfers that potential across the fulcrum. That moment in time where there's an exchange of that positive to the negative, and in that negative also exchanges back to the positive, cyclic energy. It's not negative as evil or positive as greater, or the bestowed, the greater one or the mighty one. No, it's a process of understanding the two dynamics of forces, okay? They can't combine because they are opposite sides of the very identity of life itself. So in my own theories, through my study through metaphysics and just different conceptualizations, you can find a whole host of ideas on the internet. You've got to be pretty precise in your own reasoning, otherwise you're going to get taken down some of these garden paths. I wanted to see things in front of me, okay? So in that, I had some people who had helped me in some design work to be able to take what I was spewing out in my verbiage of ideas and say, well, I know that this can be if we only try it this way. And I had a young man that was helping me take some of the ideas, place them onto a in a 3D printing to be able to make some things, and actually was able to get some stuff machined. But I want to show this first because it all comes down to the pulse. We all have a pulse beat inside of us, and that pulse beat is being formulated by the very thoughts that you think. If you have fear, that pulse beat goes up. If you're in a calm, it's in a rhythmic cycle. Beautiful things, it's all this different stuff. That is the fashioning of the identity of who you are. So if all those things are true for humanness, then those things should be also true for being able to move up through the scientific reasoning of our society, because those factors play out to how the growth of a city, a larger circumference of the government and the world structure is in the understanding. If you go back to during the times of the Renaissance, they brought out a whole new design other than religions. Religions at the time should have been a code of ethics to help man proceed into doing a better thing. Because it is true, the way you use that energy, whether chopping somebody's heads off or using it to plant a seed, is going to be what you regenerate in your life. Remember that word regeneration, because it's the factor. When you combine a pulse with rotation, you create a spin. And this is just a simple little process that I've seen where there has to be a rhythmic pulsation where you'll gain the momentum of whatever you're giving that energy to, okay? It's an outer field, and that's what you're seeing is the movement of this, but there has to be an intelligence inside that to keep it alive, okay? So that's where our machining or our ideas need to be hooked up to. Who said that first? Nikola Tesla, to the wheelwork of nature. So by going through all this, what it taught me that if I live within those so-called boundaries or the laws that nature's functioning in, then hopefully if I construct something along those lines, that the idea that I'm trying to find should happen also. So if you want to jump to the next slide, because this is kind of where things starting to unfold some of these things to show where I'm going with this. So the movement of the sine wave. Everybody's seen one of these sounding bowls. There's a cycle, and in the cycle, I'm able to push that waveform. You can feel it, and you can sense it, and you can make it sing. Okay? Our ears hear it. You hear it because it's a vibration that's picked up through the microphone, and it's being replayed. It's sent across. Remember, this thing's wireless, sent across through the Ethernets, back down to where Steve's at, and it picks it back up and resends it back out to where you are. That sine wave is the key to the expression of what we're trying to do. You have to be able to build your system that contains those elements that are constructs of the mind. So if you look on the slide, this was sent to me by Jason Verbelli, who's connected up with the Searle magnetic system. And I believe John Searle had some things that are worth investigating, just like some of these other people. Walter Russell, I truly believe some of his ideas, and even what Dale Pond's doing with the Dynaspheres and John Keeley, I do believe there's something there. If people pursue the conceptualization and find the higher reasoning, in the course of time, I'm sure it will unveil. That's the way nature builds herself. If you can create the thought and build the idea, in the course of time, she unveils herself through the flowering of things. So if you look at that picture, there's a 6-cone vortex, as you can see. I had never seen that before. The article was it's 1978. I was still in high school at that time. But it was sent to me because I had posted some things on the internet about this Magnevex that I was building. And it was similar to what was there. Never seen it before. That it was something that was so fascinating to me, it helped inspire me to believe that I was on the right path. So I'm going to set a couple devices up here that were built. And like I say, I want to give credit to a few of the people who have helped me along the way. A young man named Nick had done some of the design work. I could have never done it without his expertise in working the computer to be able to have some things machined. When he was going to school, he had this 3D printed. So to kind of explain this, and what you're seeing is a magnetic gear, okay? And the gear is shaped in the relationship of that spiral that you had seen on those pine cones and shells. It's a Fibonacci spiral that goes up and down those cones. When I first thought of it, I had no idea what it. I started with some simple funnels where I glued magnets on it. When I first got the spin, it was like my aha moment that, whoa, this could really be something. Through the course of time, I was able to really kind of hone the design and see what was available in the sense of, how do you put all this stuff together when it's just a thought, So that's where the help of other people I needed, Nick, being able to pull this out on a computer, to be able to have it printed, and then in the course of time have it machined. But just so that you can see that each of these are free. And the only thing that's holding them together is the magnetic field. So in today's world, we all use the gear teeth where they're actually touching each other. In here, this kind of demonstrates that the magnetic fields are really what are, touching each other, if you want to call it touching, where they're interlooping within each other. It's the same as with this one. That's defunct because the spiral's not right, but it still worked. This is as close as where I'm at today in building out the larger system. So if you want to go to the next spiral or the next slide, Steve, I'm going to roll through to kind of show that these are only 4 cones. And the 4 cones were great. So let me move this aside, because in that first slide that was right there, you've seen there were 6. Well, I was never into Walter Russell until I was also introduced to Russell, and I found it very fascinating that there were other people out there. And this is a diagram from back in 1934. But if you look at the bottom right-hand corner on your screen, you'll see that Walter Russell also had theorized, and that magazine article were from other students and or people who are pursuing Walter Russell's idea. So in the course of time, that I also had found that the 6-axis gear does go together. So for the patent process, because in 2019, I was issued a patent on this, and that one of my claims was that you could go small as like a nanomotor, and you could go large. And the patent attorney says, well, how do you know that that's true? And I go, man, I just feel it's true. So again, the young man, Nick, he had put some things together. We were thinking he was going to try to help me, maybe get some extra cash and make fidget spinners. And in the course of putting these things together off of the same ideas and just miniaturizing it, it validates that principle of how that spiral interacts with the fields along each other also can be done in a smaller design. And so this kind of validates and gives a little bit of proof that the factor of, putting things together from small to large can work, and then from large to small in this particular idea. So the next thing I'm going to show you is this. And this is one of the gears that it was a costly experiment, but the arrangement of how the magnets are in there are at a 90 degrees off the axis instead of a 45 along the degree of the cone. When I built this prior to any of these other devices, because this was the thought I was thinking, because something happens when you release it off the shaft, it moves back and forth. In my mind, I was thinking that, hey, there's going to be an action that would create a reaction, not realizing that that's not the way it works, because you have to really be, if you truly want to follow nature, nature has to be your guide. But something unique that I found, that in the other ones you've seen, the 4 cones were together. Well, these are all the same thing, where they're all free to spin. But on this one, I end up finding that if you take the gear, you can spin it around an axis. So I know I was close on something, because if you watch it to where it stops, there's a rotational effect where the magnetic field engages into the other magnets are on there. So I know if the arrangements were correct, there would be a pressure that those magnets would then contain themselves, and it would create a different type of motion. But if you watch till the end, the extra kick on itself, it's just the repulsion or the attraction of the fields. Part of this right now I'm working into, I'm going to build it up on another gimbal so that the inners can spin instead of just the outer. So it'll be like a gyroscope in the course of time. It's another thing that I'm working on. So all of these experiments led me into something. And right now, let me pull this out of here. And if Steve, you want to pull up the next slide, because this is where I think in our sciences, we're a little mixed up on the understanding of the magnetic field. And I don't know if this has to cut off at 7 o'clock or not. I know it's, I'm going to run it to where I'm going to run it, I guess. But yeah, Howard Johnson, I think he's an unknown, but there are some things within his understandings that I believe are very important to take a look at, and further deepening of the looking at how those magnetic fields. So if you can flip to the next slide. This was part of the clues of why I developed what I developed. And if you look at his shaping of the magnetic field, he conceptualized it that there is a, on the screen, if you look at the very middle where he's got the north and south, there is a shaping of the magnetic field around the magnet to where there is, if you want to call it, somewhat of this design. And it's that 4-leaf clover. So in my mind, as I was conceptualizing some of these things, that I believe that he's right on in his understanding that the magnetic field just doesn't go from north to south. It goes from north across. Let's say this is a magnet. There's a dominant north field and there's a dominant south field. And in that, there's a relationship of energy, because something can't exist by itself. It needs the polarity relationship. So really, the energy that flows around a magnet really spirals around it from within. And we all think that the magnetic field just goes around from the north down to the south. Well, in my research or conceptualization, if the laws and some of these different hypothetical, metaphysical, spiritual ideas, that they don't come from outer, they come from within to without. And they want to come to the outer, which creates the field which we see. And in that field, they want to come back to the source. So there's this push-pull oscillation. It's just like you and your heartbeat. You can't breathe in, you can't breathe out at the same time, but there's a rhythmic pattern. And in those oscillating patterns, you create this Fibonacci, or where they call it the Caduceus spiral through the chakras and things that keep you alive. So why am I saying that about the human system? Because if we build along the lines of the human system or the laws of nature, I do believe we'll unveil the reasoning that will lead us into the new scientific understanding of a greater expression of what we do not understand as the cyclic motion of energy. Because if some of these other people were finding the same thing, so I guess you can go to the next slide, Steve. And I'll let you flip those guys. But in the next one, you'll see that Howard Johnson had pulled out through his mapping. There are 2 vortexes. And in those vortexes, you can see there's 2 distinct relationships of how those vortexes come together, where they're at a point. And in that point, they're exchanging a certain intelligence, because that's what life is all about. the positive exchange an intelligence with the negative. And as that positive flows into the negative now becomes positive, which then expresses to the other half of the waveform to give you that cyclic motion, so to speak. It wants to oscillate continuously in that moment of time. So that's what we're trying to find. Instead of it linear, where you have to put in a certain amount of energy, you ramp up your electric generator, and in the end you shut it off, not realizing that there's been a whole amalgamation of energy constructs to build for you to be able to flip that switch, all the intelligence that's gone there into that, which you have brought in from an astral or whatever you want to call it, a higher inner realm or a thought, the mind of creation, to where when you flip that switch, that machine does an action that has been circumscribed by the ideas of what you put into it. Okay? So it's a matter of understanding those concepts of energy so that when you flip that switch, it does something that's natural according to the laws that are there. We just haven't been observant enough of those laws. So I hope that somewhat gives you, if you want to jump to the next slide, because for further investigation, it's well worth trying to dig out the works of Howard Johnson, because he was never known for the things. He had some ideas of spintronics, or even looking into what Dale Pond has on magnetic fields. But if you go and you study this, of how he mapped those things, you'll find that a simple magnet, it's not the way that they're describing to you in school. So other things that are important with that is because if the alignment is not correct, if we are to use these elements as part of the natural healing of man, in the sense that he has diseases or he has misfunctions of his body, we won't be able to rectify those conditions until we understand the process of how energy works. Because you may be stimulating the disease by adding a compound that is not in a harmonic or frequency relationship in a progressive fashion. It's actually on the wrong side of the waveform. That's why all the science that we see, it's always saying we're in entropy, where everything's in decay. I don't believe that. I don't believe in black holes. I don't believe there ever was a big bang. Life is a continuum and will be. And whoever disbelieves that, you'll explode yourself in the course of time by various lower vibrations, because you're actually impacting your psyche with doubts about what life is. Life is the progression of the movement of the spirit or the intelligence that's within you. So enough of that. Let me show you a few things here, because this is where it gets all exciting. But that is, in my research, I'm not a scientist. I consider myself more of a natural philosopher, where I try to observe things that are outside myself and say, what's going on within? Because I've had my own overcomings in my past where I needed my own healings, and only through understanding of the positive, negative interrelationship of frequency and harmonics was I able to overcome those things, using the variables that were taught to me by many different teachers along the way. So let me move this out of the way, and then I'll roll the machine in here, because I'm sure that's what everybody kind of wants to see, what's happening. So in the course, a lot of people are searching for that magnetic. Hopefully that can get where it can be seen, because I'm going to try to walk the camera a little closer. That puts it right about in center. So what I found in some of the processes of people looking, they found that there was a magnetic gate they had to get beyond. Well, I was searching that too when I first began. I needed to get beyond that magnetic gate or that lunging effect. Well, once I did get beyond that, I had to understand the reasoning that what is a gate? The gate swings both ways. So you needed both the positive and the negative. So this machine is built upon the similar ideas. I've got a pulse because I felt we needed a pulse. So there's pulse coils, and around those pulse coils are generator coils. So when the pulse coils pulse, it energizes the other coils, which are like a transformer. But as those coils are there, the magnet comes by them and it kicks that pulse. So you have a pulse within a pulse. So on the inside constructs, there's a pulse motor And on the outside, there's also inducing a generator. Okay. So it took me the longest time to be able to have a core around the mechanism. In the course of it, I took apart an old transformer and it fit perfectly, so I knew I was on the right path. But it ended up being able to generate electricity, which now I'm working into another part of the structure. But just to kind of show you, I'm going to fire the guy up. It needs a little bit of a spin. Took a long time to get the timing right. I'm going to put a voltmeter on it. There are two areas of generation. Let's see if we can see that. I'll hold it up there for a second or two. Pumping about 170. That's on one part. And on the outer field, I'm dumping about 200 volts. If you combine them, we got close to 300 hours. So, in some of the works of John Bedini, he had talked about the collapsing of the field. Shut it off so it's easier to talk around. Just to kind of show how it rolls together a little bit. Okay, now that it's quieted down a little bit, I want to hook up a couple things so you can see it does generate electricity. So I have an inner generator, then through these coils, when they're energized, they magnetize that core. And in the core collapsing and energizing, it also induces an electric field, magnetic field, in these other coils, which are then combined in the correct way to where they also are a generator. So using the right size wire, either finer wire or thicker wire, it creates either a higher voltage or a lower voltage, all according to the amount of windings. So here's a motor. It came out of an old exhaust fan, but I'm going to fire it up again so you see that it does generate electricity on the inner coils and the outer coils. And every time, just like John Bedini was saying in his design of things, when there's a collapsing of the field of the back EMF, it's run through a bridge rectifier on the base here. Let me see. Well, you can see it on the video. I didn't know how far it was seen. But in the base, it's capturing that back EMF and charging those batteries while it's running. And that's where I can hook up the Tesla system, which I'll show you shortly. It'll fire up, and it'll carry the load. Amperage is based on what type of load you put on. Amperage or volts in is 12 volts. Right now we're about 40 amps it takes. It's about 600 watts to run the thing. I don't have 600 watts. Is it over unity? No, I'm looking for something different. I'm looking for an over unity or a cyclic energy system. So let me dump this down again. Move it out of the way. Turn it back on. So Steve, you can collapse out that last set of slides there. You can open it up to the screen. So what I'm going to do is off of the back EMF that's charging the base batteries, it's running through an inverter, which gives me like 110 out. So it's going to fire up a Tesla system that I put together. So on switch. Let me shut this off one more time and I'll walk you through the system one more time. The vortex, the magnetic electric vortex. I have some things that I'm working on in the sense of charge, discharge, pulse timing to be able to see really how close you can get to energizing a field, because I believe that's where it's about. And if we can create a field that's in the similar patterning of what nature is, I believe there is a push-pull relationship that comes from that field. As you've seen in some of the prior demonstration I had, when you give, something's going to give back. So to walk you through, this is my amp meter, which shows it. And then at the base, what we have is an inverter. These are my collection batteries for the back EMF. I'm not charging them with the charge out that's running these lights. But from that back EMF, it then goes, that charge runs into an inverter. Where's my on-off switch? I have an isolation transformer so that the high frequency doesn't come back into my system. This is a small little Tesla coil setup. Now, in Tesla coils, in my research of Tesla, he was not wanting to throw lightning. A lot of people throw lightning, and that's cool. It's the greatest thing. But I think there's a missing conceptualization of what he wanted to do. He wanted to create a pressure wave with the electric magnetic field. So you'll see when I turn this on, I have a single wire that comes out, which would normally go to ground. It's just a spool. It's like a little 18 gauge wire. It runs down to this green coil in the base. You'll see that light turn on. Through mutual induction, this coil will become energized. It then also has a single wire with no return, runs out into this coil, which this is an old light that I took apart, that then energizes. Through the energizing of the system, you'll see this turn on, which has a fan motor. You'll see this light turn on, which is blue. You'll see this one turn on, which is white. And you'll see this one turn on, which is red. So go red, white, and blue. So it's just kind of my own way of thinking. But hey, so you'll see recently I was trying to discover if you could charge electric ultracapacitors. Here's two ultracapacitors on this fan. There's two ultracapacitors on this fan, which are being charged by the radiant electricity off a Tesla coil. So let me fire this guy up and put this back here, and then I'll kind of walk through it once I set it back down. See if you can see everything there. Firing it up. We got two charge out points. Back EMF, turn this on. Lights turn on. Red, white, and blue. Fan motor. All these. I'm going to pick this guy up and charge that ultracapacitor. Going to drain down that ultracapacitor. Dead stop. Walking it back into the field. Fan turns back on. The same as with this one. Energized. Ultracapacitor. Watch the fan. So you'll notice another thing. When I shut off the machine, we still have output. There's a regenerated high and low pulse on the system. These are all wireless. There's nothing. They're all just, if you want to see the circuitry, it's running through the base, runs out, bridge rectifier, capacitor, stores the potential, and they're same type of thing. You can pick them up. So I left the Tesla system on so you can see it's a isolation transformer, like I say, so I don't get the high frequency back through. Small Tesla system, it's got a hissing sound, no longer the crackle. So running out, and it shows that that is here, and pick it up and you got wireless electricity. You know, wireless, or should I say the field that's been collected and captured. So this is kind of the things that I'm striving for. There's a lot more to it. I'm looking in my own relationship of things. You know, I'm looking to see if I can find others that, you know, are interested in the same design, maybe to help build out a greater system. There's a lot of electronic stuff I don't know. I am building in using larger ultracapacitors on the machine But I think in the progress of looking for ideas out of what Mother Nature has, I'm going to keep researching into it to develop out a system that let's put the camera back so we can see what's happening if it's right, to kind of build out a system to where you could use that regeneration. I believe that collapsing and connecting and pulse timing things at the right relationship, the field's going to get stronger, then it collapses in. And when that happens at the correct sequence against the magnetic field, I believe you can create a crescendo in a wavelength of energy that pulsates. If you look at some of the things that Jason Verbelli had posted on the internet, and to kind of use an example, they had created the seromagnetic device that they have set there. And there's a field, and that's the idea, is the field coming in once you have the rotation. It's the similar concept that I'm working with when I have this vortex that I'm spinning these magnets. So in the first experiment, I showed that I can move that magnet. Well, you've seen how I was all around that magnet. We have to visualize on the larger machine, you now have all of these magnets spinning in a uniform relationship inside that vortex. Along an outer field that you have a collapsing and an energizing of the magnetic field. I believe there will be a point where you'll reach a resonance through the right capacitance and the right oscillations that you'll create a regenerative system. That's what I believe cyclic energy is about. It's not about trying to create something greater than what you have to put into it. I believe you'll create a cycle of the potential, and that will be the constructs of the energizing force, because you've reached resonance with the oscillation of the field. So if we're ever going to travel through the stars, you're not going to be able to do it by burning a candle behind you to send you into space. We're going to have to understand what's out there in the electromagnetic field of the universe, because that's the source. That's the power. That's the constructs of the mind that keeps everything alive. So hopefully this, I put you down as an hour. Maybe there's some questions or something that can kind of open up some ideas. But it kind of shows you a quick snippet. Maybe part two could go deeper into the running of the machine and some of the other things. But this kind of gives you a little visual. Let me fire this back up again. It's quiet. This could all be done with electronics. But it shows that there's a field. So theoretically, you should be able to set multiple of these up that are energizing. Have I ever felt any ill effects of this? I have not. I've been doing this for about 20 years. And I'm in my 60s. I'm in my mid 60s. I don't feel that it's destroying, where everybody says, oh, Tesla coils are destroying you. If they're of the right frequency and the right harmonics, I do believe they can be conducive to the regenerative pattern of life. Electricity is the sustaining force. So I'm going to shut this off here and then just see if there's any questions that came up. We can go further into it at another time. This is just part one to kind of drive the idea and, theoretical idea of cyclic energy, cyclic motion. So see how that works for you.
Okay, Mike, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Okay, here's a question. From Toby, did that machine have batteries?
Yes, it does.
And could you explain to them how those batteries work?
The batteries are my source. And there are two 12-volt batteries tied together. Let me see if I can pull the camera here. The two batteries are here. They are controlled through an on-off switch, which is through a series of MOSFETs which turn on and off. There's an eye that sees when to turn on and off. And it times those coils to turn on and off to spin the vortex. So you can see that each one of these will spin by themselves, but it's the magnetic field. Let me see if I can set this closer. And so you can kind of see. I have to give it a little start. But then the pulse of that, at the correct time, you got to remember there's a lot of things going on all at once. Those batteries are my source. So there's my run batteries. There's my charge out batteries from the back EMF. I can take these but I have to convert it because it's up such a high frequency, high voltage. It's a high frequency, high voltage setup. I have something, but it was just too much things to set up for tonight that I put together with a toroidal transformer that steps it back down where I can take that, plug it in, and take that and run it into the charge battery system on the bottom. The thing about batteries is they don't like to be charged while they're discharged. So Tom Bearden put up a article at one time talking about a train that had the old coal firebox. And he says, hey, if you want free energy, you can have all the free energy you want. But you can't have it at the same time. Because if you're going to have the coal that you're shoveling into the firebox, you don't want to light the firebox of the coal. You want to shovel it in one bit at a time. You don't want to light your whole train on fire. So it's the same thing. If you want so-called free energy, you're going to have to understand the principles of how these energy constructs work. You're going to have to move the breathing in and breathing out at two different cycles. That's my belief. That's what I'm striving for, because I feel that I'll be able to cycle these where I have a charged set of batteries, and or I'm looking to get rid of batteries and just use ultracapacitors. So they have a charge that you initially have to have in your system. And then let me move the camera over a little bit better. So my power ratios at this moment are I am probably not close. I don't know even how efficient. You can throw an amp meter on it, but again, you're at a higher frequency because this thing's running at, I could throw the meter on there, show you the waveform and stuff that are there. I need help and some understanding of doing some real, highs and lows, but I showed at the beginning, I was getting 200 volts out on these outer side coils, which are able to light up. It's a 100-watt regular incandescent load. This ain't very much, when you really look at it, there's not much going on with these. You got 5, LEDs, they draw 8 watts. This ain't very much, but you got to have the voltage to move it. So we want the amps. The amps is where you get your current. The current is what creates the larger field. So I'm working on those things. I understand there's physical laws that we all are up against, but I do believe that in the right understanding or the right searching, that we're going to lock the next phase of what we're searching for in this evolution of what we need as a planetary idea. Because we're stuck right now because energy. We need a source of energy. Throwing all these electric vehicles on the grid while they're shutting down the grid. I'm out in California. You're thinking, well, how smart is that? Dump the grid down, and okay, so people are stuck without a vehicle that can roll. So you want to be able to have an independent means and method to create electricity. And really, you don't create it; you just transform one thing to another. Nobody creates anything. It's just moving it from one element to another element in the quickest and most efficient design. So
I just want to make the point here to point out how people can get hold of you. And that's Mike. What's that?
Michael Leas at what do we got on the bottom? What I give? Yeah, Michael.Leas62 at iCloud.com. I'm out in Los Angeles, California. It's like San Luis Obispo area. So, but I'm even trying to either license out the patent, or if somebody wanted to build out a larger team or a network and build up something, send me an email, if it's something that you're really interested in. I'm looking for funding. I'd love to come back out. I've done some presentations at Steve, the Tesla Tech. I think it's a great thing. There's not many out there where we can present, raw ideas like this. And I would love to go out there again, but I just need a sponsor to travel all the way. It takes me a couple of days and money. Everything here has been pretty much self-funded. There has been a few donations through the course of time that helped me bought some materials, but I've tried to do this all on my own budget. If I didn't have the money, I didn't want to spend it because I didn't want to have any debt. I think right now that's the problem in our society. So, all right. I appreciate who stuck it out through my long-winded ideas, but it's something that I'm pursuing. It's not a matter of giving up or not because I've been defeated. I am learning all the time about the different relationships of energy and how it affects my life, how it affects your life. And it's fascinating to see every time I make a discovery. Just like what Tesla said, there's nothing greater than having an inventor see some of the ideas he thought about come true. So this was a dream come true when I finally got the gear to work. And then got the patent in 2019 and just trying to implement it. I think let me pull this up one more time, is that on a wind generator system, this could be your prop. And as you see, if this were loaded with magnets, that these magnets pass coils, this thing could yaw in the wind in any way. And if you added the 6-axis, one of the claims in the patent was that when you run this thing up on the 6-axis gear, that it seemingly cancels out the gyroscopic force. So you can take it and spin it in any orientation. And that's due to the relationship of how those cones are spinning in their motion. You got the opposite fields spinning, which are canceling out that gyroscopic force. So hopefully that's a snippet and a bird's eye view of what's going on in the Magnevex Research Project into the little garage exploring and kind of trying to find some ideas of how cyclic energy and cyclic motion work, and magnetism and electricity.
Hey, and well, I'd like to thank you for being here, Michael, and I hope you can make it to the conference next year.
Sure.
And I'd like to remind everyone, we do have a call for papers out, and to go check out our website at teslatech.info, and maybe even sign up for the 2024 conference video on demand. It helps keep this thing alive. And thank you very much, and I'll see you all next week. And thank you again, Michael.
Awesome, Steve.